On to this week. First of all, welcome to Tamsin. Tamsin is one of my favorite people. She is a chief people officer. She works in the venture tech world, and that's where Juggle does a lot of our business. So we've got to know each other over the last couple of years, and she's consistently impressed me with all these just very brave conversations that she has, and she's been in some really, really tough spots and demonstrated resilience time and time again. And I know that it's something that she interviews on, she's trained people on. So just very quickly on Tamsin's background, for those of you that don't know her, she trained as a psychologist originally and then moved into the world of investment banking and hedge funds and all of those very, very sort of demanding people, and worked her way up to global head of HR for a major European investment bank before transitioning to the world of venture tech, where she works as a chief people officer. And she does performance coaching for founders, also some traders. So she knows a thing or two about really building both resilience and performance in individuals and at a company level. So I am very excited about talking to you today. I guess to get us started, wanted to find out why you were interested in talking about this sort of broader topic of resilience, Tamsin.
Well, it's interesting. I've been working with leadership, management and kind of businesses now for over 20 years. And right back at the beginning, resilience was just not a topic that you ever looked at it from a leadership perspective. It certainly didn't come up in any of the leadership frameworks that we created. And over the last few years, increasingly, as we're interviewing for C-suite and people sort of getting promoted into bigger leadership positions, resilience is something that we're actually selecting for. And if people aren't able to kind of give examples of how they've been in tough situations and how they've worked through it and how they've learned to build some inner, like kind of that inner core of resilience, we just don't select for them. And I guess that really talks to what's going on in the world. So for me, I think it's such a core thing within leadership, and that's an area obviously I spend a lot of my time in. And I guess in the past, as we were starting to talk about resilience more, it was often called, it's bounce back. It was almost like an innate sense that people had, whereas actually as I'm working more with leaders, I think it's just much more multifaceted than that. So it's not just about that bounce back ability and it being innate, but actually it's people who are learning to prepare for difficult situations. When they in difficult situations, they learn from them. They learn the things that they do well. They learn the things that didn't work so well for them, and they kind of build more skill sets. So for the next time, they're able to respond quicker, better, without it having kind of disastrous effects. People having breakdowns or just coming out of the work that they're doing because they can't face it. So I think it's moved from being innate to much more of a toolkit that you can build that state of preparedness, a mindset, as opposed to just a kind of behavior that some people have or don't.
I love that. So it's because I had also confused it with that concept of bouncing back and just getting on with things or persevering and as you said, just being able to react to the situation, the behavior, rather than the mindset and preparing you like the Marines instead. Okay, that makes complete sense. By the way, hi to everybody who's joined a little bit later on. I've just noticed we've got a few more people. Welcome. You can ask questions on the Q&A function, and we'll make sure we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. And Kathy has also posted links to the next event and also the blog on this week's Resilience Challenge, and you can tweet hashtag Resilience Challenge if you have any thoughts or questions as you go as well. So just going back to this week specifically, Tamsin, we're talking about habits, so breaking the bad ones, building the good ones. In your opinion, why is this so important to building resilience, getting into that mindset?
I think, having good habits that hopefully most of us throughout our day-to-day are not bombarded with stressful events. I mean, obviously there are some careers where that is the case, but for most of us, they're unique, so the COVID situation earlier this year, will have affected people. Hopefully then it's sort of steady, and then there'll be other things that will be personal life events, or other things that happen. So I think having habits that enable you to, when situations arise, that you are able to that you have good habits that enable you to respond to them, or that you're just keeping yourself in good shape. And I don't mean just physically, but mentally too, socially as well. So you have these good habits that actually, if you imagine it as a sort of a bucket, and that you're ready and you're full to the bucket with, you're healthy, you're mentally in good shape, and something adverse comes along and you're able to respond quickly. You're not at the bottom of the bucket, and you've got to quickly then try and fill your bucket up, ready to then respond to the thing that's going on. So that for me is, it's making sure that you're in a perpetual state of readiness or near readiness to respond to something.
I love that. So think of these as two buckets, one mental, one physical, or are there more?
Yeah, I actually think there are three. When I'm working with my coaching clients, I think there's the physical health, the things we talk about, eating well, having lots of exercise, sleeping. I hear lots about sleep these days, and the importance of that. I think there's, that's from a physical side. I think there's the mental side, how you, that state of mind, how you think about things. If any of you have read Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits, one of my favourite statements he's got in there is the circle of influence, circle of concern, and that mental health of the mental health attribute where you worry less about the things you can't impact. So you draw a circle. What are the things, global poverty is certainly not something I, by myself, can impact. So worry less about it. Doesn't mean you don't worry about it at all, or you don't contribute some of the things that you do, but you don't go to bed at night thinking, I can't sleep because I'm worried about these things. And then you look at the things that you can impact, and you try and widen that. So your circle of impact gets bigger. So what are the things that I can physically do? Physically do to impact things. Increase that a little bit more than might have been. So you're taking kind of positive steps to that. Having that kind of mindset is one thing you could do to become less anxious, less stressed, less frustrated by things that you can't change that around you. So that's one aspect from a toolkit that you could help yourself from a mental side of things. And then I also talk about the social side of things too, and both on a positive and a negative side. Your social health, are you well connected with other people? Are you talking to people who do a similar job to you, to kind of just put things in perspective when your world feels difficult, or when you have a problem you can't resolve? You've got friends, family, or colleagues that you reach out and talk to. So I think those three aspects, I hadn't thought of them as separate buckets. Actually, I kind of think of it as one bucket, and each of those areas can fill the bucket for you. And if you're low on one, often people can kind of make up a little bit for the other. But I guess I would always be advocating, try and make sure in all those three areas you're spending time and effort to make sure you're kind of filling that space up positively.
Yeah, absolutely. And because otherwise I guess you can become a bit extreme in one area. So you might be super fit and healthy, and but actually you don't see any friends anymore because you've then decided that socializing is bad, and having the odd glass of wine, or a meal in a restaurant where they put too much butter, lovely butter, on food is a bad thing. And then when something like COVID happens, you don't actually have the toolkit to be able to connect into friends and family quite so easily. That's I'd never really thought of it like that. That's super interesting. What's the science behind establishing good habits?
Yeah, it's interesting. Being a psychologist, I'm not a psychologist anymore, but that being my background, I often want to refer back to, so what's making this happen? And it's great, actually, in the last few years, loads of work's been done on neuroscience. So they actually, you know, can put people in MRI machines, etc., and actually work out what's going on in the brain. And I would, if anybody's interested, one of the best books I've read around habits is Charles Duhigg, and it's The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do and How to Change It. And it's a good book in terms of it does explain really well how habits work from a neurological perspective. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to do it any justice today. But also what I like about it, and any book that I ever recommend my coaching clients, is got to be full of really practical examples and some real life stories of people who've actually managed to achieve success and what they're talking about. So would definitely recommend that book. But what they talk about is habits emerging because the brain we're quite efficient kind of vehicles, and our brain is constantly looking for ways to save effort. So if there's anything that you can make into a routine, that's what the brain's looking to do, and then it means you can kind of do that without thinking, and then you've got more space for other things, and we know that happens with driving and all sorts of things. And so how do these kind of automated processes happen in our brain? And there's 3 stages that happens. The first, there's a cue to tell your brain to go into automatic mode. Then there's the routine, so there's the trigger in the environment. Then there's the routine, and that could be a physical routine, a mental routine, or an emotional routine. And then to make it into a habit, there's a reward, which then reinforces that loop. So you go round, and that's how the habit is formed. And the brain is so powerful. You've only got to go into that mode a couple of times, and it starts to reinforce itself, and then once it's in the loop, it's going round. But what's really nice is once you understand that, that you can consciously use that inbuilt mechanism to your own advantage to then build positive habits, or to start recognizing some of the negative habits that you have and think about how you might adapt that. So for example, if you're looking to break a bad habit, if you've got the same cue, you know what the cue is that takes you into the routine, use the same cue and just replace it with a new habit. And my first experience of this, I must have been about 8 years old, and my granddad, who smoked 40 a day, been told by the doctor many times, you need to give up smoking, Jack. No, it was a well-formed habit. Had a heart attack, doctor said you have to give it up or it's going to kill you. Enough of a motivation then to trigger it. And it used to be funny, he used to smoke always after a meal, and so he decided to replace it with a new habit, which was being helpful in the kitchen, which is something long ago men potentially weren't as helpful around, and he used to get up and do the washing up, or get up and kind of tidy the dishes away. So actually a habit that was not just positive for him but my grandma too, and used to see him, immediately he finished the meal, you'd see I want to go for a cigarette, I now replace it with this other habit. And it was, he was like a bit of a machine in that way. And so we can do exactly the same, be it smoking, or finish the end of the day, go home, sit on the couch and have some ice cream, whatever. It's on my way home, I go to the gym. You see lots of people do that. It's the cue of, you used to do something, you replace it with a different routine, and then importantly, you've got a reward for it. I feel good about doing it, I praise myself, I feel better because I'm not smoking, I feel healthier. You can often give yourself rewards, if you're losing weight, you write it down, or I've lost a kilo or a pound or whatever, that feels good, it's towards the goal I'm trying to achieve. And actually that talks a lot to the topic you were talking about last week, and links it to goals. So if your habit and routine now links to a goal you're trying to achieve, you're connecting that to that motivation, which is giving you the reward, which then helps you perpetuate it and start turning your new routine into a habit. Hope that makes sense.
I love that. I love that. I have a follow-up question around the science there, which I think you said the brain is very powerful, and it only needs was it 2 or 3 goes of this new loop or the new trigger in order to rewire. Is that true for both building good habits and breaking bad ones, or can it be a bit different?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, that whole how long does it take to create a new habit? When I'm working with my coachees to try and just to shift something, I often don't call it a habit and start to call and often because habits have a negative connotation, right? You talk about habits and people will obviously often will go straight to thinking about a bad habit like smoking or something like that. I call them rituals so that people are like not thinking about a word that has a negative connotation. I also use rituals because I think it creates a sense of there's some conscious effort to a ritual, as opposed to a habit which might and they do become sort of less conscious and easier to do in that regard. But I don't want to give anybody an impression that some really good habits take a conscious effort for the rest of your life. People, runners, Olympic athletes, those kind of things, when they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do all the things they do to get them to their peak fitness, they don't do it as like a complete machine. So I wouldn't want to give that impression. And I think there was definitely in the past talked about it can take 21 days that you do a task and then it just becomes a habit. And actually there's no science behind that. I think that was we'd like that to be, but I think if you've firstly got the motivation, there's something that's triggered you to do it. Setting a goal, frustration with the habit, or actually worse than frustration, some negative connotations to the habit that's triggered you to do that. You've got the motivation, you found a reward that it gives you, it makes you feel good, or other rewards, and you put the discipline and the hard work to put it in place. It definitely gets easier. Some become then totally unconscious, but not all. I suppose it depends on the level of effort required in that routine, and the draw of the thing that you gave up. And obviously things like smoking have a neurological addictive nature to it, so there'll be a number of months or whatever until that's left your system. Other habits don't have quite the same neurological pull, and so would be easier to replace. So.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I love the change. But by the way, to everybody, we will be sending a summary out at the end of this webinar, and we'll reference the source material that's been discussed here. So you don't need to worry about making notes or anything like that. We'll send you links and names and concepts through as a follow-up. I absolutely love the change of word from habits to rituals. I've never heard of that before, because I guess habits sounds like something that could happen to you and then it's just sort of part of your life. Yeah. And of course we have the capacity to change, whereas as you said, rituals, it makes it clear that you have agency over that behavior as such, which is, I think that's really powerful. It would have made a better headline as well, ritual and routines, but never mind. Just going on to the just what you've seen in practice, what are some of the best habits you've seen of that the really successful people have adopted?
Interesting. It's lovely doing the work I do, because I get to work with lots of different people, and then some of them you think that's a great idea, I'll have that for some of myself, and others you see other people do amazing things and you try it yourself and you're less capable of taking them on board as theirs. So some of my favourite that do myself. Seeing people who've got a much better handle on their physical well-being has definitely triggered to me. So I now, and the COVID crisis, the one positive that's come out for me is the stopping at lunchtime. I sit down and have my lunch, and I go for a walk. I'm lucky that I have been able to sort of walk around here. But now that I'm doing that and it's become part of the routine, I notice how much more productive I am in the afternoon. We all talked about the sort of dead zone after lunch, particularly when you're delivering training or doing any kind of a facilitation of a team meeting or something like that. But just even on a personal perspective, that having got up away from my desk and done something else and, seeing greenery or whatever, I literally was the person who used to bring my lunch in or grab lunch on the way and eat a sandwich at my desk whilst typing. I mean, God knows the hygiene of my keyboard, and a terrible habit. But I had, at the time, I guess, nothing to compare it against. And even though people would say, oh, you're much productive if you go for that walk around the block, I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And it's not going to happen because I really didn't believe it enough or see detriment enough for myself. Now that I do it, I'm a absolute convert, and when we do venture back into the offices, this is something I absolutely commit to doing. Might not be as green a walk around the old street block, but so that for sure. The daily to-do list, and I've even found apps now on my iPad where I can physically do the checking. I think that is a great habit. That it's that bit about each day you're looking, what am I doing? You're prioritizing it. You're not just reactionary from the minute you walk through the door. And at the end of the day, even if you've achieved one or two small things, there's a sense of achievement. Work can be a sense of, I come in every day, what's the point, where am I getting to? And so from a kind of sense of values, but also making sure you're focusing on the right stuff, a great habit. There are lots of things I've seen people do that I often will share with leaders that I'm working with that I have not taken on myself. So, passing along the good news, but haven't done myself. So the blocking off email time, I have tried it and obviously didn't have a strong enough reward mechanism because it's never embedded. So I can talk about how to establish good habits. There's definitely something in this one that hasn't quite got the reward for me. But this block, turning off those horrible notifications that you get on emails or pinging you, and we've got lots of distractions like that, and actually carving out an hour here in the afternoon, an hour in the morning or whatever to do emails, and actually only doing them then. And then the upside is to sort of carve out real chunks to do really deep work. And I think, whatever job you do, as knowledge workers, as most of us are now, it can only be beneficial to really spend time to zone in. And there's lots of neurological evidence that we do our best work, kind of half an hour or so after you've started the work and you've really got into flow. So I think that one's a great one. That practicing daily gratitude, you read it everywhere, from magazines, leisure magazines, right the way through to kind of mindfulness practices, etc. That every day talk to that self-talk about what you're grateful for, as a great support from your mental health. Stop seeing the negatives in things, and reducing anxiety. I've got some of it. I definitely look at the positives of each situation as they're happening, as I weigh them up, but not always the end of the day kind of weighing up all the positives of the day. And the friends and colleagues who do it, you can definitely see the positive vibe that it gives them in their workload. So I think that's a great one. Starting the day with exercise. So literally the best entrepreneurs I've worked with all are highly disciplined from this fact. Unfortunately, if I could get another 15 minutes in bed, I'm always going to choose that. So my exercise is at the end of the day, and I think I do the exercise, so that's great. I don't think it has quite the same effect on my mental health. It helps me sleep better, I guess. But if you're a morning person, unlike me, I think that's a really great one to have. And there's kind of reflection, meditation, mindfulness, and I know that that's having a massive impact across. Even I hear Goldman Sachs, teach their executives mindfulness technique. So I mean, of all the companies I would have never thought would take it on board. So I think mindfulness is one those that practice it, you can tell the difference it makes. I walk and I do mindful walking, but I can't quite do the sit still mindfulness, and I think that talks much more to my kind of personality traits. But yeah, so they're some of the ones that I've seen really have an impact.
So it sounds like the kind of physical side of things and getting set up in a routine for successful people, that seems to be a consistent theme. It was interesting what you were saying about the reward aspect, because that came up twice, both in the to-do list and setting up that system that they can feel rewarded at the end of the day, and then also actively praising themselves as well. And I think that is one of those, the actively praising thing. I completely agree with you. I think we see that as well in particularly successful founders, but that is something that could really apply for flexible workers as well, particularly if you're working autonomously. You might just not have colleagues all the time, or a boss who's sort of completely in tune to managing you that way. You almost have to just become much more self-managing and give yourself a pat on the back, which is easy to say, and well, it's a bit cringy actually to say in practice, and we're English as well, so it's hard to reconcile that culturally. But yeah, I mean, as you said, if successful people are doing it, it sounds like a really important habit to start. I want to spend a bit of time on the bad habits now, because it has been a particularly stressful time, and it's pretty easy to fall into bad habits. I think all of us have laughed on social media and the various memes that have been sharing about downing bottles of wine, and and particularly for people who've got children, how stressful that homeschooling situation has been. Should we just have exceptional circumstances? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, actually, one good habit you were talking to there about sort of self-care and positively reinforcing yourself, because there's often very few other people that are out there going to do it for you. I think it's really important, and even when you're trying to form a new habit, you're going to fall off the wagon, eat that bar of chocolate, or not go for the run on the day that you said you were going to do, or run away from the networking opportunity that arose. I think it's really important to each day you're going to face battles, whether it's trying to informing a new habit, or keep doing a bad habit, or whatever. So accepting that battle, and I think in coaching we're taught a technique of kind of recognizing stuff, actually labeling it, and the voice that you're hearing going, you've eaten that bar of chocolate, you're a terrible person, or whatever, is recognize hearing the voice, but acknowledging it and saying, okay, that's okay, there's going to be battles, I'm not going to do so well on some days as others, but tomorrow I'm going to try again. And so that I think is the first one. The second is, if you've said I am now going to do this habit, and then you don't, and then you say, okay, right, I accept that I didn't, and last week was a hard week, these things triggered it, I accept that, so next week, if there's a pattern that you keep not moving to the habit that you're trying to achieve, as a coach, the first thing I would do is say, let's sit down and talk about why that is. Something's blocking it. So is it that the draw, I think of it as like scales, is the draw for the thing that you'll keep doing more strong than the thing that you want to do? why is that, and are there things that you can do to then redistribute the balance so the thing you want to do has more pull for you, and there's things that you can load onto that, I guess, starting to think about the longer term. So if I do lose weight, or if I do drink less, or if I have better sleep, or if I network more with people, or if I sit and do this exam, the consequences for me will be these things. And starting to list those down and list more of them and explore more of them, you're overweighting the pull than the draw to go back to doing what you're doing. Or have a reality conversation with yourself that I'm not ready yet. The things we were talking as people were joining about my Facebook habit that took quite a long time to break, but there were a cumulative number of things. And at the beginning it was, the ethics, I wasn't happy with them as an organization, but I hate to admit it, but those things obviously weren't as important to me as I was thinking they were. But as I was starting to realize the time I was wasting, and psychologically how I was feeling about myself when seeing other people posting things and thinking I'm not living up to the expectations that I set, actually once I really realized what they were doing negatively and the time I was wasting, that I could be doing something else that I was trying to achieve, that was enough of a pull that the scales then rebalance. And then when I then actively looked to break the habit and put a new one in, it was as easy as one of the easiest things I've done. Yet 6 months it seemed impossible to do. So I think give yourself a break, and when things aren't working continuously, to give yourself a break on those short-term failures, because we're human, and on the long term, if you're not managing it, really start to explore why, and do what you can to rebalance. And if you can't, it's because that motivation, that reward mechanism in that habit just isn't strong enough for you.
I like that. So it's sort of in the short term, don't just accept. It's not just accept full stop. It's accept and then say tomorrow is going to be better because I've actually decided that this wasn't right and I wanted to drink less, or whatever it is. But equally, don't just be a critic, because that's then being almost a horrible parent to yourself, and we're kind of naturally going to rebel against that. But then if it keeps happening, we have to explore the why, and it could just be tweaks around that habit mechanism, and as you said, just making the reward stronger, or it could be that we're not ready for whatever reason, and deeper exploration is needed. So I mean, just onto the bad habits again. So drinking, smoking, comfort eating, we know that they're bad habits. What about the subtler ones? Can you give us some examples of those that you've seen during your time as a coach?
Yeah, interesting. Actually, the negative self-talk is something I see frequently with either people I'm coaching or actually leaders within the business. And I think somehow they've been reinforced sort of societally, educationally, where it's almost beating yourself up and not believing you're good enough is seen as, that's how you get better. And I know certainly, even from personal experience, that's kind of where I got to, until I had a superb coach, Christine Champion, worked with me a number of years ago, and really helped me see the sort of negative self-talk that I, again, thought it was a helpful thing for me, and really started to move that to, the positives. And I think as a leader, I've seen how much a better leader I am as a consequence. And certainly as a, coaching other people, that sense of forgiveness and seeing the positives of what you do, rather than just always trying to fix the things that you're not doing so well. Negative self-talk. And allowing time, just allowing time to get to things, I think is an important habit.
That's interesting.
Giving
so
space.
rushing.
Yeah. which is one of the reasons why I wanted to give up Facebook, was one of mine this last year, is actually creating habits which are actually sitting. Not, I'm a big advocate of mindfulness. I don't practice meditation. I kind of think I should, maybe, but actually giving yourself time to reflect on things, to kind of think long term, where you personally are going, the business is going, your team are going. I think allowing time. I think the habit we've got into is, your diary needs to look full. You need to be in back-to-back meetings. If you're not busy on a particular task, that you're wasting time. And I think sort of that it's less physical. I think it's a more mental activity that I think is a good habit, and people who do it well, I can see the benefits.
Absolutely. And I think that sort of rushing around, as you said, it's a subtle, but it can be a bad habit, a bit of a crutch to lean on. What advice would you give people in light of everything that's going on? And a lot of people are experiencing, job loss, or the company is just not performing as it should be, for forces often beyond their control by now. What advice would you give them to get things back on track, to give a sense of routine to anchor the day?
That's an interesting question. I know, I've sat on some conferences recently, actually, where they've given some good advice on this, around making sure that you are actually connecting with people on a regular basis, because most of us are working from home, and that sense of not knowing what's happening, which that whole sense of control of your own self, if you're not connected with decisions that are being made for the organisation, your team, the sense that you aren't actually in the room, even if you weren't part of those decisions in the organisation when you were there physically, you would feel that you were there in the organisation, you knew the discussions were going on. So that sense, so making sure you're connecting, if you're a leader, connecting with your teams much more frequently than you would physically in the office. Because if I were working with you, I would pass you a couple of times a day, I might have a coffee with you. You're not doing those things. So actually proactively putting those anchors in, so you get the sense that you are aware of what's going on, you're aware of decision making, but also just making sure that the world is going to change in this. It's going to have, and not all of those things are known, and so when I'm ever doing career development with people, is always think of yourself as your product that you sell, thinking, am I making good use of this time right now to make sure that this product is agile, that it's flexible, that if things do change, I can seize opportunities, rather than being, things change and I'm impacted by them, I'm a victim of them. So I think, I'm not suggesting everyone rushes off to do training courses, but are there things that you think, I would be much more efficient if I had this skill, this language, this kind of practical activity that I knew how to do, and that might be through training, it might be just through talking with other people, reading books. I'm in the middle of a new one myself. Use the time. We're not commuting. We have less things to do in the evening. There's less, you can't go to bars, restaurants, cinemas, theatres, etc. So are you using the time to build a new habit, build a new skill? Because if the world changes, you want to be at the point where you can pivot with it, whichever way it goes. So I think, and that also, if you're doing proactive things, we know from a mental health perspective, they might not be the right things. I might not know that they're going to be the right things. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But if I feel like I'm taking ownership personally, I'm going to feel more positive that I'm at least taking charge of my destiny as much as I physically can. It's that circle of influence, circle of control again. So I would definitely, be doing something proactive, because even if you don't need it, you felt like you've taken some control right now.
Absolutely, I love it. We are now moving on to the question portion of the webinar, and we're going to be wrapping up in about 10 minutes. So please do get your questions through on the Q&A function. We've got some great ones to start up. So a couple of quite simple but really effective ones. What's the best way to start the day?
Oh, goodness me. I'm not the person to ask, am I? The way I start the day is as late as possible. That's interesting, isn't it? I think, there's a lot said about, start the day with food. I know personally, we start the day, my husband and myself, actually, we make sure we get up at the same time, which is more of a stress for me than him. And we have, time together. Even when we both commuted to London, we'd have our cups of tea, our breakfast, and we would kind of talk through kind of whatever came to mind, but just that human connection. So yeah, I think that, like I say, great entrepreneurs I've worked with have all got up and gone for God only knows how many hours of runs. Yes, exercise is good, but yeah, it's not something I could put in. But I think
I'm in a household of I'm a morning person, hence we did this at 8:30, and I'm with someone who sort of literally looks like this, still will be by now. So we unfortunately can't spend the time together. But that's the first time I've heard that. That's really nice. So you actually actively set aside time to have that kind of relationship connection in the morning, which I guess sets you up really nicely for the day. You get to spend time with your favorite person.
Yeah, and you
feel everything starts.
Yeah, you feel human as opposed to just I've got up and now get into the work machine. I think that's why we started it. Was you can literally fall out of bed, into the shower, eat your cereal bar on the run, get in the car, get on the train, and you're on some kind of a conveyor belt. So I think that we thought that was a good way to start.
Love it. So next question is, should I measure my habits?
Interesting. Measure as in how well you're doing. I mean, when you're losing weight, that's certainly, you measure around your waist or whatever, don't you? And you have your little chart to say, I'm now this. I don't like doing that so much because I think it's so easy if you miss the goal, and it's a tiny miss, but nonetheless, if you are 1% under what you said you do, you feel like a failure, as opposed to actually I've moved more than I was. However, there's lots around, if you measure things, you've got that clear goal in mind, and you're more likely to get closer to the goal you set than if you just say, I'm going to change. So it's an interesting one. I think you need to be very careful. I talked about those battles, and you will have nobody. I'm sure there are people who just say, I'm going to do this and achieve it. But most of us humans are going to attempt something. It will go well. We'll have a bad day. It won't go so well. We'll pick back up. And there'll be the peaks and troughs. So I think if you're going to measure it, be kind to yourself to say, overall, I'm going to set myself, a time period to achieve something, and I'll accept that. It might not always be quite as easy as plain sailing. And it's interesting, actually. So I had I've had health problems. I was diagnosed with arthritis a few years ago and had to have a hip replacement last year. and my recovery didn't go as planned. And I'd had lots of issues beforehand, but before the surgery, nobody said, you know, it will get better. It was all manage it. As soon as I'd had the surgery, the expectations from the surgeon, everybody were literally 3 months later, you're going to be able to go and do marathon running again if you like. And it didn't go to plan. But because I'd had that expectation sort of set by others, and then had internalized it myself, kind of the stress and the kind of frustration with myself and the kind of not anxiety, but the misery that it then caused internally was much more than previous, where actually I was now better than I was, but I felt I should be more. So actually then working with the physiotherapist to kind of reset my expectations, it's taken much longer. And there are days where I don't quite get where I'd like to, but overall, when we measure where I was and where I'm going to, I can see real progress. And so kind of I've personally experienced that. I think you just, you know, being kind to yourself and realistic and recognizing that, you know, it isn't this perfect, most things aren't this perfect structure, and they take a lot of effort, and things outside of your control can sometimes set you back. And they happen, and that's life. And actually having the resilience to say, okay, that's not where I wanted to be, but what am I, you know, how do I reset now and where do I go to? I think it can be really, it's necessary. Otherwise, yeah, I could have just said, okay, well, I'm just going to have to sit on the couch for the rest of my life.
Love it. That's an example of resilience right there.
Yeah.
I think this is probably going to be our last question. Maybe one more if someone sneaks one in. But if you are someone who overthinks, replays scenarios, overanalyzes conversations, and that can lead to anxiety, what are the best ways to start breaking that habit? Wow, that's a huge question.
Isn't it? Yeah. So I'm not going to pretend to be a qualified psychologist at this point. And I think if somebody's struggling deeply with anxiety, cognitive behavioural therapy can certainly be a real win on that regard. And that is about replacing kind of negative self-talk with positive. And I think, you know, from all of us, it's easy to get, I think it might be easier to get into the kind of negative spirals. Yeah. The first thing I ever do when I'm coaching people is, you know, tune up the noise to hear it and recognize it. And then you kind of meet it where it is and say, that's actually negative self-talk and it's not helping me. Yeah. So the first thing is sort of dialing it up to say, I if you can move yourself to the point where it's that I choose not to listen to that negative self-talk because it's not helping me, and I want to move to this direction. And so it's like having you know, friends who are not good for us, and finally when you say, you know, there are lots of good things about this friend, but these are all the negatives about the friend, and this, you know, where I am right now, it's not helpful, so I'm either take them out of my life, or I'm just not going to listen to the things they say. I'm not going to open up the conversation for them. And similarly with the negative self-talk, and as soon as you've done that, met it where it is, I think you then dial it back down to say, I hear it, I'm not listening to you, I hear it, and I'm masking you out or muffling you because you are not useful to the purpose that I'm trying to achieve. Yeah, I find that works quite well for me.
Love it. Thank you so much. We are out of time, but Tamsin, thank you so much. I've learned a heap here. So we're going to summarize this and send this over to everyone. So just a quick recap on what we're doing next week is all about changing direction. So what happens when you need to pivot, which kind of goes to the heart of what resilience is all about. So on that call as speakers, we will have, and I think she's actually on as an attendee from what I can see, we're going to have Sarah Furness, who is now a coach. And Sarah's come from an amazing background. She's been in the RAF, she's been to war, she's just one of the most incredible people. She was introduced by another founder. So she's going to be talking to us about really what it takes to change direction under pressure. And also Sophie Adelman, some of you might know Sophie. She's the co-founder of White Hat. And Tamsin, I know you know Sophie. She is just amazing. White Hat help early careers. So they're all about apprenticeships and training younger people in future of work skills. And they're just growing great guns. They've taken money from Lightspeed Ventures in San Francisco and also Index Ventures over here. So they've scaled super rapidly, and then COVID hit, and they're this educational platform where they physically coach people in the office. So that was a massive change of direction, and they had to sort of pivot their entire business in a matter of weeks, and Sophie was at the helm of all of that. So she's going to be talking to us about their experience at White Hat, and Sarah's going to be talking to us about her experience from the RAF, and very much going to the heart of mindset. So that will be same time next week, so Wednesday 8:30 a.m. for an early session with those two. And if we're going to send out the next resilience challenge this week for you to have a look at, and that will be at #resilience-challenge. Our handles are all at Juggle Jobs, and that's across Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So really looking forward to seeing you next week. And Tamsin, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.